Okay. Hello and welcome to everybody who is coming on in. We'll get started in just a second. Give you time to connect to your audio and get situated and everything. We are recording this event. This isn't for White Whales files or anything like that. I'm gonna send the files to the Lit 16 crew and that will be theirs. So there is a recording out in the world, but you're not gonna find it on White Whale's website. Okay. So, hello again, and welcome to everybody who's joining us here tonight. Welcome from my, half bedroom over here. I'm sorry about my closet to close back there. So I'm Anna from White Whale Bookstore, and we are very proud to be a part of Lit 16's crew and to be hosting the second quarter reading and conversation. Tonight, we're joined by writers Camonghne Felix, Danté Stewart, David Dennis Jr., and M Shelly Conner. In Robert Jones Jr.'s words, in the spirit of community over competition, the Lit 16 is how Deesha Philyaw, Kiese Laymon, and I decided to use our platforms to shine a light on emerging writers whose art has impacted, inspired, and moved us in ways that we wanted to honor and share with you. But I will let Robert, Deesha, and Kiese tell you more about the series in just a bit. So a little bit about myself and about White Whale. So again, I'm Anna, the events director at White Whale Bookstore. I see a ton of names I recognize from Pittsburgh and from our virtual events generally. So thank you all again for showing up. And I see a lot of new names and hopefully later new faces. So if you're not familiar with us, we are a family-owned general interest independent bookstore located in the Bloomfield neighborhood of Pittsburgh. Our store motto is conversation, community, and culture, and we strive to be a home for book lovers. Our events programming features local, national, and international writers and translators reading, discussing, and celebrating literature of all genres and for all ages. So just two events I wanted to shout out quickly for you all in case you're interested. They're both virtual events that we have. On the 25th next week at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're hosting Emily Perez and Nancy Reddy for poetry reading and conversation. And on the 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're hosting Moseb Abu Toha and Tuan Das for another poetry reading and conversation. I'll be moderating their conversation for that one. So you can find out more about those events and about other events on our website, whitewhalebookstore.com. So some notes and housekeeping on our Zoom settings. We're going to keep your video and your audio off for the duration of the event, just so that it's easier to focus on the moderators and organizers and the readers and me very briefly. We will have a moment at the end for you all to turn on your video and audio to give a quick round of applause to everybody. So definitely stick around for that. In the meantime, the chat in this Zoom meeting is public, but I just wanted to remind you all that you signed our code of conduct by signing up for this event. That's on our website if you wanted to check that out again. But otherwise, feel free to put congrats, conversations, interactions about everybody's work in the chat. Please feel free to message me at any time if you have any tech or logistics concerns. You can message me privately if you prefer. And we will have time for an audience Q&A at the end of the night. So you can put questions in the chat, again, privately to me or publicly, and I'll collect them all and then I'll ask those questions at the end of our moderated conversation. A couple of other things, take a look at the bottom of your screen. You should see this little smiley face with a plus sign, the reactions button. So that gives you the opportunity to throw emoji. Oh my gosh, they're animated now. That's new to me. So you can throw emoji on your video, or in the case of a lot of people in the audience, your black box with your name on it. And that is a really fun way to interact with everybody over the course of the night. And for best viewing, I like to recommend hiding the non-video participants. And what that means is the black boxes with everybody's names on them, like appear at the top of your screen. So what you do is you hover over your video, click the three dots, which is the settings, and then click hide non-video participants. And as you probably noticed, we have Zoom's live closed captioning available at the bottom of your screen. You can toggle that on and off as you need or wish. There's a button there at the bottom of your screen. And there's also, through the chat window, I believe, there's an option to view the entire live transcript. Okay. So that's all from me. I'll be posting links to everybody's books in the chat as we go along. I'll hop back on for the Q&A. And we'll start by turning it over to Robert to kick us off. So thank you all again for being here.
Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you everyone for joining us for the Lit 16 second quarter fire circle. I am Robert Jones Jr., author of The Prophets, coming to you from Abbott Elementary. Not really, but kind of. And I wanna just reiterate the purpose of the Lit 16 in the spirit of community over competition. The Lit 16 is how Deesha Philyaw, Kiese Laymon, and I decided to use our platforms to shine a light on emerging writers whose art has impacted, inspired, and moved us in ways that we wanted to honor and share with you. We could have easily created a Lit 64. In fact, Deesha wanted to do that. There are so many fantastic recent works that we adore. Unfortunately, for many reasons, we are unable to accommodate that large of a scope. However, we do encourage all of our artistic peers to advance toward the directive set forth by the iconic and legendary Ancestor Toni Morrison, who said, "If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else." Be sure to follow the Lit 16 hashtag on social media, hashtag Lit 16, and subscribe to my newsletter, Witness, on Substack to stay up to date on upcoming Lit 16 events. Thank you so much for joining us in celebration, the Lit 16, honoring 16 emerging literary artists whose works are changing the game. If you are enjoying Lit 16 in our events, please share your experiences on social media. And now, with no further ado, I am going to introduce our first writer. M Shelly Conner, the infamous, is an educator, multi-genre writer, and creator of the web series Choir Life. Conner is assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Central Arkansas, where she co-directs the MFA program for writers. She has published in the AV Club, The Griot, Playboy Magazine, and Crisis Magazine. Her debut novel, Everyman, is the winner of the 2022 Nautilus Book Silver Award in Fiction. My colleague and brother, Kiese Laymon, had this to say about Everyman. Everyman is the rare 21st century novel that feels like Morrison and Walker guided the hand of the characters and the writer calling it home. M. Shelly Conner writes as if all of our lives depend on her art. After reading Everyman, I am convinced she's right. Family, please put your virtual hands together for M. Shelly Conner.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Deesha, Robert, Kiese, for first putting together the Lit 16 and then inviting me into this wonderful fellowship. Trying to get myself together because y'all playing around in the chats. So I'm going to read this excerpt from Everyman, and the only thing that you need to know is my character Eve has traveled. It's 1972 Chicago. She's traveled to Ideal, Georgia, to find out information about her family beyond the aunt who raised her, and she arrives and meets this elderly couple, Deuce and Evelyn. And so she meets up with them. Deuce waves her back to the back porch where she has a talk with Evelyn, and Evelyn recounts this story from 1950. 1950. Gertrude had dreamed of fish last night, and it had thrown off her entire day. She couldn't concentrate on cooking, cleaning, or any of her church duties. She sat next to the charred brick that was Sister Evelyn's pound cake and stared at the fierce woman who trembled with anger in front of her. "What the devil, Trudy? All I asked was for you to watch it. Now look at it." Evelyn grasped in vain at the scarf tightly bound to her head. "What on God's earth is going on in your head?" Gertrude opened her mouth to speak, but the words escaped her. All day she had searched the faces and mannerisms of each woman with whom she had come into contact. They all appeared the same. No one had made any changes. Still, Gertrude had dreamed of fish, and it only meant one thing. If there was a woman who reflected some change in her body, then it was someone in her own home. She dreaded going back there. Evelyn's tirade lost steam. She sighed and plopped onto the bench next to Gertrude. Trudy, what is it? Gertrude focused on her friend. They had been as close as two peas in the church pod. Gertrude had taken Hezekiah's advice and began volunteering at the church to give her a sense of purpose while he was away at work. She found such comfort in the place. Polishing the wooden pews felt like dusting her own furniture, and she sat with such pride in them every Sunday morning. She beamed at the other parishioners, knowing that the seat of their salvation contained her sweat and work. Yes, church was home to Gertrude, more home than home itself. Pastor Reed's thunderous voice was the vessel of God. Its cadence rumbled inside of her. When it spoke, she listened. What it said, she obeyed. She had tried to get Hezekiah involved, but he wanted no part of it. He seemed to revel in his heathen ways. Gertrude felt that it was her duty as a Christian and a wife to help him to salvation, but when he refused and denounced the pastor as a two-bit hustler, she knew that she would have to save herself alone. After Hezekiah was killed, Pastor Reed and the church were lifesavers to Gertrude. It still seemed like yesterday when she was first awakened in the early morning by the intent rapping on her door. It could be no one but Hezekiah. She snatched her housecoat from its perch on the bedroom door and checked on the girls before making her way to the front door. She sighed. She would make him wait a while. She would feign anger when she saw him, but the truth was that she missed her husband. She missed his presence and his touch. Most of the time, her body belonged to the Lord, but Hezekiah had a way of borrowing it now and then. She blushed with the thought as she yanked open the door. Cornelius stood before her, filling the frame with his mask. He removed his hat. Gertrude. She began to shake. Cornelius Gaines had never been the harbinger of good news, and he was usually the cause of whatever devastation he reported. Evelyn stayed by Gertrude's side night and day for months until she was able to get herself together. The years passed, and time brought about a very odd construction of family in a way that only small communities can incubate. The cement that hardened Gertrude's insides against Cornelius gradually melted until it was a mere stone at the center of her heart. He provided for her family financially. She tolerated him. He became a father figure for the girls. She cared for him. He never made any advances toward her, and she began to accept the strangeness of this fictive kinship and allowed herself to admit that she now had with Cornelius what she had tried so hard to shape with Hezekiah. Her heart battled with the realization. She told herself that the price was too great. The price of Hezekiah was not worth the life she had with Cornelius. Yet Hezekiah had been a spiritual test with his every visit. He was the last temptation that she could not overcome. Eventually, she reconciled that the Lord had known her struggle and had removed Hezekiah, casting him away and giving her the angel of death, who did not tempt her physically, yet cared for her girls. Was not the biblical Job blessed with a replacement family once God and the devil were done playing chess with his life? When Mercy and Anne began to call him Uncle Cornelius, Gertrude did not correct them. It was a Faustian exchange, a life for a particular lifestyle with the payment made up front. Normalcy settled like a scab over a wound, visible yet allowing continuity and function. But a scab removed too soon may reopen the wound, and when Gertrude dreamed of fish, it ripped her world apart. Gertrude thought again of her dream as she gazed at her daughters. Her eyes fell on Mercy. At 15, Mercy exhibited the changes of a girl becoming woman. Her hips were rounding, her bosom expanding, but where her face should have narrowed in the transition from mahogany cherub cheeks to firmer raised cheekbones, something was awry. There was a fullness to her face, Her nose had widened. Gertrude examined her youngest daughter with her eyes. Mercy had indeed changed in a way that only a mother knows. She stared until Mercy dropped her eyes. You a child. It was more a statement than question. I don't, Mercy began. No, but she did know. Understand? She had understood. A part of her had probably even hoped. Who the devil is it? Gertrude demanded. Devil was right, for Gertrude had made a deal with the devil and foolishly thought that the debt had been prepaid. As if mocking her mother's feared transgression, Mercy replied, It's the Lord's. Don't you get smart with me, Mercy. Don't you dare blaspheme God with some little bastard. Mercy folded her hands across her chest. Her sister Anne stood across from them at the stove, silent but listening. It would serve Mercy right. Did she think she could have everything and everyone? She smirked at Mercy. Why can't it be God's will? Mercy shot back. Because God's will is marriage, not opening your legs for anybody at any time, Gertrude shouted. But God's will is also murder, ain't it? What you talking about, girl? It was God's will for Cornelius to kill Daddy. Mercy's eyes were full of anger. Gertrude interrupted. Don't you talk about things you're too young to know. You sit here and take care of him, the man that killed your own husband. I guess that's fine with God, though. The slap was not surprising. Not to Mercy, who didn't even flinch upon its impact. Not to Anne, who was riveted by the drama. And not to Gertrude, who had been suppressing the impulse since she saw the prenatal spread of her daughter's body. Truthfully, she had wanted to do much more harm, and it had scared her. The slap served as a compromise. Now confused by the turmoil of her actions, she didn't want to take it back, but had an impulse to grab Mercy into a hug that was tight enough to be both love and hate. But she didn't. Her arms stood limp at her sides. Her feet remained planted on the floorboards. 1972. Evelyn had neared the end of her glass. Eve's remained untouched in her clenched hand. Who's my father? She asked. Evelyn sighed. Well, you got to understand how different things was 20 years ago. Small town, everybody was always in everybody else's business because we ain't have all the distractions you young folk got now. Who was he? Eve repeated. Well, your mama never did say, but Evelyn drained the last swallow of whiskey. Miss Evelyn, please. Evelyn nodded. They say it was Cornelius. He denied it, of course. Evelyn glanced cautiously toward the door and lowered her voice. Don't even think about asking Deuce. He practically raised Cornelius and he won't hear no parts of it. Say, ain't no way Cornelius done that. What do you think? Eve asked. I think Cornelius was complicated. He done some bad things and he done some good things. We like to think that men are simple. Feed them and love them, and that's all they need. But they're more complicated than that. They do some great things and then turn around and commit some of the worst sins ever thought of. Was she forced? She never said one way or another. Never said who the daddy was or wasn't. And if it wasn't Cornelius, then Lord help us all, because he went to his grave claiming it wasn't him. Spent the whole time before your mama took off pleading with her to tell the truth. Eve finally sipped her whiskey. The shock of the information overpowered the burn of the liquid making its way down her throat. Is there anyone else who'd know anything? Maybe Geneva. She and your mama was thick as thieves, if I remember. So my sort of step-grandfather may have been my father too. Eve looked at Evelyn. Evelyn peered out into the darkness beyond the porch. Somewhere in her storytelling, the floodgates had opened and lines between what should and shouldn't be told had blurred. She had not shared the circumstances of Hezekiah's death, perhaps out of some allegiance to Deuce, perhaps as a last-minute reprieve to Cornelius, whose kindness to Gertrude she had witnessed. More than likely, it was because of what happens when large chunks of lived experience and relationships are abridged into answers to single-sentence inquiries like Eve's question. Years of love and pain become trivialized into storylines that resemble soap opera plots, tales for housewives with which Evelyn had become familiar. She had been a faithful viewer, like most who could manage to steal a break during work hours of One Life to Live, ever since Ellen Holly graced the screen as the first Black soap opera actress. The series saw a spike in its African-American viewership, even among men who were not part of its target audience. To Evelyn, Eve's summation sounded like something straight out of her morning stories, and she was reminded why no one wanted to go back down this particular road. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much. No one, well, very few people on earth, I think, can fill a scene like M Shelly. Like man, you got the most out of that scene right there, fam. Thank you. Also want to thank White Whale for hosting us. Thank my family, Deesha and Robert, for making this possible. And also want to thank Marina for being the glue and making it all come together and contacting people. All right. I'm lucky enough, y'all, to be able to introduce someone who is home to me, someone who is family. David Dennis Jr. and I share a home, and I sort of became a writer, listening and watching documentaries of David Dennis Sr., David Dennis Jr.'s father. So formally, David Dennis Jr. is a senior writer at ESPN's Landscape. His work has been featured in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, and The New York Times. He is a recipient of the 2021 American Mosaic Journalism Prize, the National Association of Black Journalists Salute to Excellence Award, and he was named one of the Root 100 most influential African Americans of 2020. The movement made us a father, a son, and a legacy of the Freedom Ride, written in collaboration with his father, is David's debut memoir. After I read the memoir, I wrote a lot, and I took 3 sentences out of what I wrote, and this is what they put on the book. The movement made us takes literature to a momentous Southern Black space to which I honestly never thought a book could take us. This is literally the movement that made us and both Davids love us whole here with a creation that is ingenious as it is soulfully sincere. Stunning. I'd like to introduce y'all to David Dennis Jr. Thank you.
My brother, thank you so much, man. Thank you, Robert, Deesha, Kiese. Honored to be here amongst these folks. This is seriously, we could take out all those like accolades, just say Lit 16, and that'd be all we put on everything, because this is among like the highest honors I've ever had in my entire life. So I love y'all and thank y'all for including me in this for sure. I'm going to read part of the book. A little bit of background. My dad was a very reluctant member of the civil rights movement, didn't want no parts of it, found himself in Montgomery as they were planning, deciding if they were going to continue the freedom rides or not. Dr. King was there, all this stuff was happening. And, we're meeting him at this point where he does not want to be, secretly does not want them to continue the freedom ride because he wants to go home. But, this is sort of a pivotal moment for him in that movement. So they're all in the room deciding on what to do with the freedom rides after the bombings and all the violence in Alabama. All right, this is James Farmer. These rides are happening. Show of hands, who's going on those buses? As soon as he spoke, I heard a voice from somewhere in the room say, okay, now make your choice, because there's not enough space in this room for both God and fear. God and fear. For some reason, that one sentence made me drop every burdensome fear that had held me back. The strain on my shoulders from holding on to the dream of finishing school instead of fighting for freedom went away. I didn't think about coming home for the summer and hugging my mother. I didn't think about another night in jail. I didn't think about going back home and holding my grandmother in my arms or lifting bags of mulch to help my grandfather on the plantation. I didn't think about anything beyond the next few hours. I no longer was carrying the terror of risking my life for this movement. I loosened my grip on survival, and the weight of my fear falling from my shoulders cracked the ground below me, breaking through it and sending me crashing into a reservoir of disregard I didn't know existed before. I was free. And in that moment, I became someone willing to die. I grew up playing with army figures, and was fascinated by the soldiers who had bayonets on the front of their guns. I always wondered what compelled someone to be the first in line for war, knowing that there was a good chance they'd die as soon as the fighting started. What compelled someone to run headfirst to death? Pride, legacy, ignorance? I never understood the inclination. But all of that changed after hearing about God and fear. I understood that all of us in the movement were much more like those soldiers on the front line than I had wanted to admit, and more than this country has wanted to admit in the years since. To decide to face the Klan in the Delta, the police in Jackson, the bombers in Montgomery, the governors in Georgia, and the FBI in Washington, the white men who wanted to make themselves feel superior by seeing our bodies swinging from hickory branches, the mothers who packed up cold cuts and gathered their children to watch lynchings at the park. We had to understand that dying was as sure as the first bead of sweat in a Mississippi afternoon, and yet we marched toward it. I knew at that moment that I was willing to welcome death with the same passion that I desired freedom, that the end of a noose could come before the end of segregation, that a gun pressed against my temple would be as likely as me voting. Just as I knew Dr. King's role would be to lead us, and thus he needed to be protected from assassination in jail, I knew that I would need to be willing to die, that my role in the movement would be that of the sacrifice, that the reluctant change maker is the perpetuator of stasis. I needed to commit fully or not at all, and not at all was never an option. I had to be the foot soldier charging ahead for what could be the last few dozen steps I'd ever take. I still don't know what makes those soldiers charge their bayonets, but I know why I charged. I charged that the people behind me, those that would follow, could have clear paths to their freedoms. I see the Black boys and girls in places like Ferguson and Minneapolis or Atlanta, chased away by smoke bombs and armored police cars, beaten and terrorized. Have they come to terms with their mortality? Did they think their last days would come when they decide to take to those all-too-American streets? Did the sting of the tear gas reveal the specter of death? When I look at their eyes, I see that some of those children have made the same decisions I did. At some point, they decided that they'd have to sacrifice all they've ever been to change this country. Still, the world I had hoped to create was one in which these young men and women would be able to both carry morsels of innocence with them and hold the ability to experience fear. Because to have that fear means that you are still carrying the desperate desire to live. I lost that desire that night in Montgomery. I knew that in order for me to commit, I'd have to leave my dreams of living behind. I rejected fear and chose God. And I was sure I'd see him in a matter of 24 hours. I raised my hand. I was going to join the Freedom Rides. Neither Jerome or Doris ever really expected me to volunteer for the rides. They'd always hoped I would, and Jerome's egging me on was more tongue-in-cheek than serious. But he looked scared for me as he saw my arm shoot up. Dave, you don't understand. We're going to die tomorrow. I looked at him and smiled. What the hell, right? I wish I could tell you about what it was like to be on that first Freedom Ride bus, but I simply don't remember much of it. I think I just didn't bother to remember anything because really, what's the point of remembering if you're certain you won't be alive to relive those memories? But some of those memories come back when I force them to the front of my mind. I remember that the National Guard cleared the roads, but there were protesters on the highway median the whole way to Jackson. Angry white men and women and their children with picket signs, shotguns, nooses, lined the roads, all yelling at us as if we could hear what they were saying from a speeding bus with closed windows. At any moment, one of them could have tossed a bomb at us. What were the guards and their big guns in our bus going to do then? I remember singing and joking the whole ride to Jackson. I remember someone had to pee really badly. I remember fleeting moments where I thought I'd make it to Jackson safely, then feeling foolish for allowing myself to hope. Then suddenly, Jackson, my first time in Mississippi. We were directed off the bus through the back of the station directly into a paddy wagon that was waiting to take us to jail. All part of the deal Kennedy made with the Mississippi government that allowed him to provide us with escorts. I made the walk with a smile on my face. Jail didn't scare me anymore. In essence, we were under arrest as soon as we left Alabama. We went calmly, partly because we'd been briefed that this would be the procedure if we made it to Jackson alive. All of us marched in a single file as if we were on a school field trip, except for one woman who started screaming. The police and a couple of the rioters grabbed her to try to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop screaming. No, I'm not supposed to go to jail. I'm not supposed to be here. She twisted her wrists and balled her fists and dug her feet in the ground to try to get away. She gritted her teeth and struggled against everyone trying to subdue her. I was supposed to die. I was supposed to die. I'm supposed to be dead. Why didn't I die? I'm supposed to die. I'm supposed to be dead.
Thank you, David. Hearing you read that is definitely different and harder than reading it myself. And I had, as you know, I had the honor of meeting you and your dad here in Oxford, Mississippi, and hearing your dad talk about, those moments. And I just, thank you feels inadequate to say, but I'll just say thank you for the gift that is your book to all of us. I have the pleasure to introduce you all to, for those who don't already know, Camonghne Felix. Camonghne is a poet. She's an essayist. She's a memoirist. She is the author of Build Yourself a Boat, which was longlisted for the National Book Award in Poetry. Camonghne's essays have been featured in Vanity Fair, New York Magazine, Teen Vogue, and other places. Dyscalculia, a love story of epic miscalculation, I love that title, is her debut memoir and will be released this year on Valentine's Day. And I was blessed with an early copy of Dyscalculia. I would hold it up, but my youngest daughter now has taken my copy, so I no longer have it. But this is what I said about Dyscalculia after reading it. This book took my breath, grabbed my heart, and made me see. It brought me back to every heartbreak I've ever endured. And I marveled at Camonghne Felix's deep knowing and even deeper articulation of the pain of loss, the loss of self, the loss of love, and the pathway back to healing and something like wholeness. This book is a gift and a miracle, and Felix's pen and heart are full of the most beautiful fire. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Camonghne Felix.
Hi, man, this is amazing. I'm super stupid honored to be here with these legends and honestly just listening some of clearly the best writers of this generation. So that's fun. This is one of the first times I've read from this book. So I'm not completely sure how I'm reading it just yet. And y'all are helping me figure it out. So I appreciate your patience. The only thing you need to know, I'll give you this definition of dyscalculia. Noun, severe difficulty in making arithmetical calculations as a result of a brain disorder. So dyscalculia is a brain disorder or rather it follows a brain disorder, happens because of a brain disorder. When I say I wanted to die, I do not mean it hyperbolically, metaphorically, or symbolically. I'm not trying to metaphorize an ache or insult the natural functioning of the mind. Memory makes me flawed in remembering, but this I can tell without mirage, without the phantasmagoria of misery. I loved him, and it gave me a fever. So boom. The morning after his birthday, we lie lazy in the deep cusp of our bed, the sun's tender touch grazing the fur of our bodies. I reach over to check the time on his phone instead of mine, mostly because his was closest, mainly because a pesky impulse primed me to look and I get giddy in my ancestors' mischief. I press the phone's button to illuminate the screen, and as if summoned, one lone text flashes white across the face. I'm so in love with you, baby. I wish you were with me last night instead of her. At first, I smile easy at the warmth of it. I love to know that the one I love is loved, a natural symptom of narcissism or of gratitude. After a moment, a dawning flushes over me, the warm wisp of that easy morning suddenly plucked away, my pulse racing into disgust as I realized he lied, realizing I knew exactly who she was, the memory of a girl he'd curiously and opaquely befriended just a few months before, projecting from my memory's junk archives. On my birthday, she offered me a shot of dry gin, the taste of her guilt like salt on my tongue. I had asked him then, and he had lied. Like an instant high, I feel myself losing my sense of time, colors ringing in my ears, the sun brighter than ever before. I shake him awake, shaking him. As he wakes, I see panic fill in on his brow. Who, he asks. What? I'm in love with you, babe, come on. Except the tether is missing from his eye. He is lying again, right to my face, his betrothed, his promised one. Breathing gets difficult then, and with all the ringing in my ears, thinking is an odd task. Something takes over and I lean into autopilot, calling her from his phone before I even know who I'm calling. She answers and I demand precision. I want to know what? I want to know for how long. Okay, so T. Apparently, he had been planning on leaving me. Apparently, she had been planning on waiting it out. That whole sad time, I had been planning on becoming his wife, so none of the data aligned, the margins too muddy to reconcile. There's silence, then the crushing wail of a million mornings, then a collapse. From a view above the room, I watch myself melt into a foolish rage as I'm being let in on a secret that had canceled me out, that made me the woman unwanted. All of a sudden, I am a child again, up in a flame I can't stop, an anger I can't manage. I wanted him, and I wanted him to be sorry, and I wanted to be a woman who could go glamorously unaffected by such blatant ignorance, because how dare he eclipse me, make me ugly, how dare she even fucking breathe. I wanted her ruined, I wanted her flattened, and I wanted to fucking die. A fractal is a never-ending pattern, infinitely complex. It's a simple equation processed over and over again, reproducing itself in perpetuity, hiding around and inside of us like Russian dolls, like a forest bordered by and stuffed full with trees, like a river that splits and meets itself in another river, like a stamp, like your DNA, like your brain, like your lungs, like their function. Where any death, even the tiniest one, is the result of a patterned agitation. Sankofa in my loins, Sankofa in the meat of my memory. I have to spiral back to return. I was born smack dab in the middle of the coldest month of the year, born bold and resistant to the unpredictable, born an urgent sun burning a blister into the shoulder of the earth. Capricorn sun, Gemini rising, Taurus moon, Sagittarius Venus, INFP, year of the monkey. Black or White by Michael Jackson was #1 on the Billboard charts the day I was born. Social consciousness accepting its bifurcation, the zeitgeist setting the terms of my induction. In August of that year, Mall of America opened its doors to a new era of capitalism. And in October, Cartoon Network debuted to a generation of perpetual parodic psychosis. Loss, abundance, greed. Children see the world clearly when they first come into it. It's circumstance that sullies the walls of our terrariums, less and less light getting in each day. At 13, I rolled my first spliff, borrowing from the white paper stash beneath my mom's bed, buying nickel bags of seedy dirt from the apartment building's resident dealer. I get kicked out of school that year for truancy. The next fall, I redo 9th grade in another school. A teacher notes that I seem to have just missed algebra. A guidance counselor notices the cuts on my arms, the pipes of our little secret bursting. At 19, I gathered my skirt and went out into the world like this, choosing to leave home with $50 in my pocket, moving 2 boroughs south to Brooklyn to recreate myself in the glitter of youthful extravagance and the sexy tropes of tortured artistry. I wanted to be free from the cage of my mind's silent torture, from the violence of my mom's worry, free to print myself out in the world like a watermark, to let my ugliness shimmer in the mirror and the heaviness take swim. All of my friends were tired, sad, trauma-burdened poets with absent fathers. For one of the first times in my life, I wasn't special or even particularly exceptional, and neither was my clawing, persisting sadness. I fit right in with the other sad, drugged-up girls at the party who couldn't remember the night's conquest, but could remember the way he praised her passion, the way he saw her, if only for a mottled moment, for what she really was, a changeling begging to be turned inside out, a Diana who would do anything if he would promise her safety, the protection of dominion. It is through living, then dying, and living to die again that we discover what being alive was supposed to mean at all. Thank you.
Wow. Come on. I see you have that Toni Morrison photo in the back, just the same pose as the one I have here. I guarantee you she was touching you when you was writing this, because wow, that was just outstanding. I cannot wait to read this book. Oh my goodness, my God. Have mercy. You want to shut the game down, period. Wow. I'm like tripping because like, wow. Thank you, family, for that. That was just whoo. Just as a reminder, everyone, if you have any questions for any of our writers tonight, please put them in the chat. We will be more than happy to review them and answer them for you. The next writer that we were introducing had a last-minute conflict and is unable to make it. So I will be reading in his stead, and that writer is Danté Stewart. And just to tell you a little bit about Danté Stewart is a writer, speaker, and preacher. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Time magazine. He was named one of 22 faith leaders to watch in 2022 by the Center for American Progress and by Religion News Service as one of the 10 up-and-coming faith influencers. His debut memoir, Shoutin' in the Fire, an American Epistle, earned him the Georgia Writer Association's 2022 Georgia Writer of the Year Award. And here is what I had to say about Danté's debut memoir. Only once in a lifetime do you come across a writer like Danté Stewart, so young and so masterful with the pen. This work, Shoutin' in the Fire, is the thing to make dungeons shake and hearts thunder. What is most striking about Fire is Stewart's commitment to truth-telling in the Black Christian liberation tradition. That is what makes Shoutin' in the Fire tongue speak, Hosanna, holy, the kind of clarion call that would make Maya Angelou hoot and James Baldwin holler. And I am going to be reading an excerpt chosen by Danté earlier from Shoutin' in the Fire, an American Epistle. My phone rang one day. It was early. Danté, my mom said with a trembling voice. Your granddaddy got out of the house early in the morning. We don't know where he is. We've been looking for him for hours now. He's lost. My heart immediately sank to the carpet floor. I felt turning and twisting and trembling. I grabbed the olive oil in the green bottle. I rubbed it in my hands. I put it on my head like Bishop did when we stood in line during service to get prayer. I got on my knees and prayed and prayed and prayed. Whenever we would get in trouble or would get sick, my mama would call for the elders of the church and they would pray for us. It may not have changed our situation, but it did make us less ashy and more greasy and more comforted. So I prayed my oily prayers. The flood that came over my body was violent. It was rushing from my stomach to my neck. My mouth was dry. I started to feel my palms sweat. How's grandma doing? What is she thinking about right now? What is she feeling? Is she afraid? What's going on? I was terrified. I was angry. I was tired. I needed some air, so I walked outside. The morning was still, quiet. There were clouds covering the sun. I was afraid, so very afraid, so very sick. The cold, brisk air came and it went. My heart was racing, and I hadn't even started running yet. I cried. I cried because I was not around. I cried because I didn't want to lose him. He was lost, and there was nothing I could do about it. I prayed another terrifying prayer. God, let him be found alive. What's the update? I asked my mama when I called. Jazz, my wife, and I were in California. My family was in South Carolina. That distance felt terribly far that day. It felt like ages away, and I felt powerless and terrified because there was nothing I could do but just wait on a call. I tried to convince myself that my granddaddy would be alive, but if I'm honest, I had started to prepare myself for his death because I didn't want to have my heart shatter again at the pain of another cold, dead Black body. I could not take the thought of abruptly learning of his death. So I prepared myself and I prayed and I tried to remember so much I had experienced of him and had known and talked about. I wanted him to live, but I was prepared to grieve if he died. Everybody is still looking, she said. What's the update now? I asked her again an hour later. Everybody is still looking. The next hour, the next hour, the next. I could hear faint voices in the background that had been up for hours. The night before, they were all at church together. My granddad was lucid. He was himself, talking with everyone. Now, he was lost. I was angry. I was angry that he was lost. I was angry at how mean this disease was. I thought to God, why would you let this happen? Hasn't he been through enough in this God-forsaken country? Hasn't he suffered enough? My mom called me a few minutes later. Sister Jones said that the Lord told her, you're going to get your daddy back, my mama said. Go look for him one more time, Deb. Sister Jones instructed her, telling her all these things she said God had let her know. My mama resolved to look again. Everybody was tired. She was tired. She was angry. She was sad. They all took a break. Then they got back to it again. She said she heard it in her spirit. The river, Deborah, the river. Go back to the river. As children, we would never go to the river. My mama would always warn us about the snakes and the wild hogs and all the ways we could die because we could not swim. The river terrified me as a kid. I imagined ghost stories of people who didn't listen to their mamas and didn't make it back. I had thought about all the times DePaul would go and take his gun just in case a snake or a hog came. I knew I was fast, but I didn't want to have to run for my life or to my death. They had a search party looking everywhere for my granddaddy. Some took a break. Some drove to the other side of town. Some stayed to comfort my grandmother. Y'all, my mama called out to family members at the house as they gathered for a snack before heading out again. Let's go back to the river one more time. Everybody was tired, but they agreed. The dogs had picked up his scent. They ran through a wooded area as the sun was beginning to set. My family could hear the water as they followed the dogs through the woods. Go back to the river. Everybody started calling his name over and over. Reuben, 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 no answer. They knew wild coyotes ran through the bushes, old trees and dark leaves. They knew of wild hogs snorting and aggressive. They knew of the water moccasins, poisonous, deadly. 14 hours had passed. He was still not found. He had no meds. He had no cover. His frail body exposed. Go back to the river, Deb. Go back to the river. They walked across the embankment on the high side so they wouldn't fall off what my mama and them as kids called the cliff. Reuben, hey, a voice cried out in the distance. Be quiet, everybody, my mama said, motioning for everybody to be still, silent. Daddy, Reuben, she cried out. Hey, we found him, we found him, we found him, everybody shouted. They found him sitting underneath a tree by the river. His gray hoodie with the red rooster on it was covered in mud. His frail body still alive. My mama called me to tell me the news. I shouted and cried because he was alive. They rushed him to the hospital. He was alert and alive. Daddy, can you sing me a song? My mama asked as he laid in the hospital bed. He started humming, clapping, and singing. I know prayer changes things. I know prayer changes things. Yes, I know prayer changes things. He didn't know where he was at, but he knew he could sing as he lay, his body covered in a white gown with blue dots on it. It washed over him like fresh country rain, steady, yet patient and healing. I visited him when he got home. I walked up again to the old red brick house in Sandy Run, South Carolina. I walked to the door and saw his smiling face. He was laughing. He was laughing. He was singing. He was dancing. Granddaddy, I said, as we sat down on the couch days after he had returned home, talking about El Paso, Texas, the place he barely remembers but always talks about. You still got your dance moves? He paused, rubbed his bald head with the patches of white on the side. He looked at me. He looked me in the eye. Well, I don't know, he said, but I'm still here. He may have lost some memory, but he still remains. That is his story here. That is our story, our Black story. There have been things snatched from us. The nation and its people have stolen from us. He doesn't remember his time living in El Paso, the miles and miles he walked to school in South Carolina. He doesn't remember every heartache and hallelujah that brought him to where he is today. He doesn't remember all those John Coltrane tunes that he used to play on that old piano. He doesn't remember the songs he used to sing, the outfits he used to wear, the card games he used to play, the drives we used to take up and down I-95. He doesn't remember the prayers we prayed around the dinner table, the prayers that he led because he was like a pastor to us. He doesn't remember how proud he was of me when I first put on the jersey, or when I got married, or when I had Asa, his first son. He doesn't remember traveling all the dusty country roads, picking up kids for practice, driving all those Black folks to the polls when they learned their voices could be heard. He doesn't remember Martin. He doesn't remember Rosa. He doesn't remember the movement or the struggle, the suffering or the terror, and maybe that is okay. Maybe in the loss of memory, he gained his body back in ways this country could not steal from him. He doesn't remember, but we do. When he can't remember, we told his story, and still he is found. Breathing life back into the past, pulling us from the ranks of your history, Imani Perry writes, is how you build yourself. You are born to something and some place. You become a living accord and road. That is how we move forward. This is how we have remembered. This is how we have survived. This is how we find home again. This is how we learn to love. Thank you.
Ooh.
Y'all, Lit 16 for real, right?
It is.
Woo.
Took us forward, back, and across. Pulled in 4
Mercy.
directions and made whole.
Bruh, how come you don't read all our books though? How come you
I know,
ain't
I
even
know,
you
I need to read mine.
ain't even read your own book though, bruh? What I'm saying, you know what I mean? What you doing out here, my nigga?
I will not read any of my books, but thank y'all. So do we want to take questions from the audience first, or do we want to ask ours? We're gonna ask ours.
We get one each. Yeah,
Okay.
we get one each. I got mine.
Okay. Y'all go first, because I'm gonna ask a question that's like out of the box or something.
Okay. All right. This is my question for Shelly, Camonghne, and David. What was the last book you read that was so good you wanted to throw it across the room?
Amen.
Ooh,
This book.
what's that?
What's that?
It's called Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Aw. She's an
Ooh.
Australian writer, and it's a really, really, really short novel. It's like 110 pages, but it's,
I have never heard of it. Thank you for that.
yeah.
David, Shelly.
So I'm going through right now and stopping. So I'm in the process of reading the reissue that has been all over social media of Black women writers, and it's probably the most inspiring thing I've ever read. Just like hearing the thoughts of these brilliant Black women from all this time, and I definitely have to keep stopping myself because it makes me want to be better, and it's humbling to think that like of who came before and who's still out being brilliant, and just wanting to be part of that legacy of brilliant Blackness. And it's probably it's taking me a while because I keep tossing it across the room and sitting with it. So
excluding your work, of course, because that's the easy answer. I felt that way, of course, about Kiese's Long Division. I felt that way about Secret Lives of Church Ladies. I felt that way about The Prophet. So excluding those, I have to say, the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois is one of the most recent ones where it did so much that I didn't even know was possible at the time, in so many ways. So yeah.
That's right. That's right. What's
including it being like a real thick 800 pages.
I'm telling you.
But to read so quickly. So yeah.
It did read quickly. It was shocking. Yeah. I was scared, and then it read. Can I ask a direct question to Camonghne? Wait, can I ask? I'm asking Camonghne. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I think we were talking a bit on messaging when you were making this book, and I wanna ask about the wondrous part of making like your poetry prosaic, like, because I think I can feel and see how this would be terrifying to experience and to put out in the world, but I also can think about how there might be something revealing and moving from this form, or moving this form into like this sort of like essayistic forms to me are like not so lively or dynamic. So can you talk about the wonders of moving from one form that to us you've mastered and making that form, making another form hold a lot of what you've done in poetry. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, it's something that I learned from all of you, right? Like you don't necessarily write memoir, but you're all crossing genre in a lot of different ways. And I think one thing that I've learned from watching y'all and watching some of the other people that I respect a lot, from Jason Reynolds to, look, the list is endless, is that it's gonna terrify you. And if you're if you have too much hubris when you approach that transition, then it's going to beat your ass. So you have to lean into the process of transitioning, right? And I really enjoyed being afraid and not knowing what I was doing. I think that, I've been publishing poetry for almost 2 decades, since I was like very, very young.
That's crazy.
Which is a really wild to think.
That's wild.
And which was part of the reason why Jason actually asked me this maybe last year sometime, where he was like, well, why won't you write a novel, or why don't you write this story as a novel? And I was like, I mean, I might, but I haven't written it as poetry yet. So I want to start there. And it was the same thing with memoir, where it was like, yes, I probably could have written this as a novel, even as a autobiographical novel if I wanted to, but it seemed more daunting and a little harder to try to make it memoir. And I wanted to do the hard thing and see where I ended up. So thank God I finished this book before I sold it. So I got to feel like I genuinely had, like done the work, that I sort of like earned the ability to put it out into the world. So I think a lot of just like humility in the transition and trying to like willingly get your ass beat.
I feel you. Thank you.
I'd like to know something a little bit, out of the box. Name a song that made you a better writer.
No friends in the industry. My brothers ain't my brothers, man. You do. Who said that?
I would say I'll go because I'm doing a little project on him right now. So I would say my guy, Ghostface.
Yeah.
So so just all the Ghostface storytelling is, I mean, like I definitely consider him one of the great novelists of our time. And one song in particular is a deep cut. It's a Seaside, as I've been told. Is Maxine from Bulletproof Wallets, and it's just like this story of like this, dude busting the projects and like trying to abuse these two women. Like this community comes together and like basically toss this dude out the window. But it's just like, I mean, the layers of storytelling that he packs into a 3-minute song, with Raekwon, of course, together, but just the amount of storytelling that Ghostface does in his music just makes me, and I listened to it. I mean, it came out when I was a teenager, so I've always wanted to write stories. And I think about like crafting stories and scenes. I think about Ghostface as much as I think about any writer. And Robert, my New York brethren, can appreciate that. New York will have a chopped cheese and talk about it or something like that. But yeah, so it's definitely Ghostface and his storytelling has made me want to be a better writer.
I mean, completely to the whole other extreme on that. When I'm listening to music and writing, first of all, I'm pulling something that pulls me into the scene and embodies what I'm trying to work with. And I grew up listening to a lot of like blues with my mom. And so one of my mom's favorites is Dinah Washington. And I love A Cottage for Sale. And so particularly with writing Everyman, This Bitter Earth, the Max Richter mix of that was just so beautiful. Like it made me cry. And I'm like, I feel my characters are pulling me towards this song. And I have to write about this relationship between two of my characters, using the lens of this song. And so I think that song in particular made me a better writer for especially what I needed to do in that scene.
For me, I don't know if y'all have ever heard this song, but there's a song called Affirmative Action by The Firm. The rap group that Nas started. And Foxy Brown's verse, I must have listened to that verse maybe 100,000 times at this point in my life since like 15 years old. And I remember just being on the bus to school and just being like, what is she? What do you mean? Like, I got the bigger nigga with the cheddar was man dripping. He had a fucking villa in Manila. What are you talking about? She's such a beast. It's just like the artistry was so masterful on this song. Like everybody brought it. Nas, Foxy. Like there was a good 3 years where I was convinced that Jay-Z wrote that verse, and I felt so bad when I learned that he definitely did not, because Foxy is a beast. Yeah, that's the song for me that is always going to challenge me and make me think like, am I pushing my language as hard as I can? Is my workflow doing what it could do? Because Foxy, she just wasn't playing. It's the sexiest verse ever written.
My opinion is Foxy is the most slept on rapper. Like, and I think it's because in New York, it's like, it's either Little Kim or Foxy, and it can't be both. And that's bullshit, because Foxy has bars. Like, and people sleep on her. So I'm so glad you said that. And then you brought up The Firm. People from New York know The Firm, Nas, AZ, Foxy. Come on.
Period. That's how you distinguish a real true New Yorker from a transplant. No shade. I'm not being shady.
I thought that was Dre. I thought somebody told me that was Dr. Dre's group, though.
He produced it.
Well, it's Dre, so
I know. I'm just fucking with him.
He was like the Monopoly man.
I'm just fucking with it. I'm just fucking with it.
Little known history on AZ's song Sugar Hill. The singer is Miss Jones from the radio. I don't know if y'all remember Miss Jones used to sing. She sings the hook on AZ's Sugar Hill, which is another slept on song. AZ got slept on too.
Oh yeah, big time.
Oh, big time. Big time.
A little too much New York rap going on in here.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, now we got to do something about this. I should have said Outkast.
Y'all been holding it down for y'all been holding it down for what, 2-3 decades now? Come on, give us some shot. It started in the Bronx. Come on, it started in the Bronx. So
what started in the Bronx?
I will fight. I will fight y'all.
You said blues?
No, hip hop.
Oh, I thought you said soul. You said soul?
Hip hop.
No.
I thought you said rock and roll. My fault.
Oh, you playing games right
now? No. Oh, you talking about the thing that took all that shit and made it into something else? I got you. I feel you. Right. My fault. My bad.
Talk to him. Let him know. Talk to him.
I ain't know what they were talking about, bro. I ain't know.
I'm usually the only Mississippi person these things out too now. We loaded up.
What you're not going to do is sleep on Philly. We changed. Who like redefined soul music?
The Beard. Who redefined The Beard? And John and Bull. That's all they get.
Wait,
that's all they get.
The beard. Are you talking about Black Thought with the beard? Because that's what I think.
That's what I'm saying. Philly, I'm giving Philly props. Cheesesteak,
nice
beard,
gowns.
Bull.
Love
the gown. Beautiful gown.
Oh, you said beautiful gowns. Come on.
Oh wait, somebody said beautiful gowns.
Yes.
Come on, say beautiful gowns.
We not gonna have this infighting. I love the whole entire Black diaspora.
I like to talk shit about New York until I look at all my checks that say New York, and then I'll be like, oh shit.
If it wasn't for y'all wouldn't have Mary, y'all wouldn't have Puffy. There would be mad people. Y'all
You could have stopped at Mary. You could have stopped at Mary.
Yeah.
No, but Puffy put Mary on. Come on.
Y'all always go too far, Faye. Like y'all just got it. You got Mary.
If it wasn't for Chicago, y'all wouldn't have. If it wasn't for Chicago, my hometown, y'all wouldn't have
house music.
Exact. Oh shit. My fault. Wait, hold on. I didn't know what you were saying, Sil. Why you go? Oh, hey.
Look, house music.
Also, yes, house music, especially deep house music. Now we can talk. Yeah.
Soulful house saved lives.
Yes.
And
still is. Mm-hmm.
Do we have any questions from the audience, or should we keep asking questions?
We do. Anna, I think, is about to join us. There's Anna.
Hi. I mean, I'm just loving this. I'm like, loving the exploration of music history here. So thank you all so much. We have a couple of questions from the audience. We have 3, I think, really fun questions from people I really enjoy. So for Camonghne, can you talk about the symbolism showcased on the cover?
Yeah, there were a lot of different cover ideas, and we ended up at this one because it did a lot of the things I wanted it to do. When I saw this cover in my head when I started writing it, or I saw a rendition of it, and I knew somewhere there would be a heart with a sword through it, even though it's like pretty cliche. I was like, I'm gonna fuck with the cliche. I felt like I'm entitled to fuck with the cliche. I don't know. So I said, screw it. But that's really it. A way to also indicate to people that this is a story about romance, but also that it's like a alternative romance approach, I guess. That it's not just going to be like your sort of like heart and written. It's also a tarot card. I study and write a lot of tarot. Yeah, so 3 hearts in the tarot. That's where the heart came from. Yeah, I just wanted to put all the stuff that makes me think about this book and makes sense to me on the cover in a way that hopefully would read to others. And I really wanted to put out a little bit of a, I don't know, like a spotlight towards young people who I know are really invested in tarot right now. That's definitely how I found my way into spirituality. So anybody who's at the kind of the beginning of their spiritual journey, especially if you're dealing with like actual magic in any way, I want them to feel called to this book because I think it's it can be helpful in thinking about divination more artistically. So yeah, thanks for that question. That's a great question.
Great question.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you again to the person who asked the question. We have a question about all 3 of your books and their titles. I'm curious if your books had any other possible titles, and thank you all for this.
Well, my book had I was writing. I originally was writing a very angry book. I was starting this book, obviously. Trump was elected, and it was like all these people did all this, and look what y'all still have done in this country. And I was just angry, and it was just going to be about dead black people, black folks that y'all done killed. And there's like there's no value that like white folks know that they've done that, and black folks know it's happened. I'd rather write a book that was for us to sort of gain some power from. So originally, my dad did his eulogy for James Chaney. He said, "I'm tired of funerals." That was gonna be the name of the book. I'm tired of funerals. And there was no, there was just no hope in that book. And that's not that's not doing justice to any of these folks. And I, somewhere along the way, it was like we need to do a book that honors them and what they've done, and acknowledge the fact they won. Like they won this war. The United States had bombs and spies and all that stuff, and this group of black folks in the South, the most put upon and ignored and abused folks in the South won this war. And so we changed it to what it is. Movement made us. Movement made me, made my dad. It made everybody what they are. And so that was the change. But it was part of the process of changing this from a very depressed hurt book to something that I felt was more of a balm that we needed.
Well, for me, it was always going to be Everyman. I just thought about why can't a Black woman be the everyman character, this universal avatar for these experiences of self-discovery and the journey woman story? Why can't it be a Black woman who represents that journey? So it was always that for me. Yeah.
Yeah, similarly, it was always dyscalculia for me. The subtitle came a little bit later as my press was trying to figure out, like, most people don't know this term. They're probably not going to like Google it when they see it, in the store. How do we give it some context? And that's how the subtitle came about, and it was a couple of different things. I was going to just name it Heartbreak Epic, but it didn't sound as good. This is way better, but it was always Dyscalculia. I actually, some people say Dyscalculia, which is fine. I found a very, very early draft, like that I copied and pasted from my notes that I sent to a friend, and the subject line was Dyscalculia, and it was like 6 years ago. So it was very self-determined work.
The title of a book can really like change the entire perception of it. Could you imagine Toni Morrison's book was War until they changed it to Paradise?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
It would have been a completely different approach to that book had it been, you know?
That's wild.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I just turned on my mobile hotspot because we now have a thunderstorm going on outside in January. So hopefully we all keep together online for a little bit longer. But our last question here from the audience is, if your book was turned into a TV or a movie adaptation, what kind of soundtrack or score would you like to accompany the story?
So I actually have a Spotify list for Everyman. You can look it up. It's got everything on there. It's, I tried to find things that went through the generations of the book. So some older blues music. Of course, This Bitter Earth is in there, but also well up through the 70s. So the scope of the book moves from 1972 Chicago and parallels the Great Migration in reverse to 1920s Georgia. So you've got a little sum of everything in there. Check it out on Spotify, Everyman Soundtrack.
Yeah. Also to follow up on Shelly, because I did the same thing, I also have a Spotify playlist that I will drop in the chat. And I see it as a score, really. These are all the songs that move with me through the different timelines that I pulled in. So.
Oh, thank you, Anna, for putting it up there. Anna's put it up there. Thank you.
I had a dream when I didn't realize how soul sucking writing a book was. Like I was gonna get like all the Mississippi rappers to like make a soundtrack. You know what I'm saying? I wanted like Fifth Child and Skip Coon, all those people to make a soundtrack to the book. Like I miss those old like 90s soundtracks, like Above the Rim, Soul Food, like those soundtracks that were compilation albums. I really wanted to do that. And so I would love to do something, have something like that. That's like a complete compilation work of art, but like Mississippi Southern rappers and singers like doing it. I would have loved to have done something like that.
Awesome. All right, that's our Q&A. Yeah, I guess, one more round of applause while we're a smaller group. And we're now going to do something that I always think is very joyfully chaotic, which is we are going to allow the whole audience to turn on their audio and video. So I'm just give me a second while I pull everybody's spotlights. I would recommend switching over to gallery mode so you can see everybody's joyful faces. And you can do that in your upper right-hand corner. And you should be able to turn on your audio and video if you'd like to join us for a quick round of applause.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
Shout out to all the people.
Hey, look at that people. Hey. Hey.
My wife, Tiffany. Hi, Tiffany. In the next room, but also down there in the stairs.
What up, Tiffany? Wow, some of y'all got some nice kitchens, I see.
All right.
Shelly, how come you ain't tell us Tiffany was gorgeous? My God.
I mean, she's my wife, right?
Come on.
Talk. Let them know.
What you think?
I do 10s only.
And she's all about the comics. she's all about the comics, Robert. So if you want to have conversations about comics, she can write back with you.
Yes, please.
There you go. There's my mama. My mama's in there. Hey, mama.
Mama,
Oh,
Miss Carolyn.
Hey,
Hey, Miss Carolyn.
Miss Carolyn. Or as we say, Miss Curlin.
Love you all. I learned so much.
Fiona.
Yes. Shout out to my mom who did find the chat feature and saw everyone saying hello.
That's
Hey,
amazing.
Mama.
That's amazing right there.
Thanks, everybody. Oh, it's so great to see your faces. Thanks to Christine and the loyalty team for joining us tonight. They hosted our
Love you guys.
bye, everyone. Thank
Peace,
you.
y'all.
All right,
Thank you.
bye, y'all.
Thank you all so
Guys,
much.
thank y'all so much.
Bye. Thank you
I
so
love the
much.
snow. Thank you, everyone.